Good morning and happy Eclipse Day. In our little corner of Western New York, we are right in the path of the totality, which will hit about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Hopefully we will all survive it. See you again in another video, but if we don't, it's been good to know you. Doing something a little bit different today. This is not a musician. Andrew Doyle is a comedian. But he first came on the scene as an international phenomenon about 5 years ago when he created a character known as Titania McGrath on Twitter. And he would post very, very woke things. It took quite a while for people to figure out that it was satire because he had a perfect ear for mimicking the absurd things that a lot of woke people believe. And it turned out he was a man, he wasn't a woman at all, and he's actually a conservative, not a woke liberal. That phenomenon has grown even more common these days. In fact, a few weeks ago, for April 1st, I was taken in by a number of news stories that were April 1st parodies. I'm usually very, very good at spotting those because, in fact, I used to write them myself for years. So I know how it's done. So I have a good eye for picking it out. But the problem is the gap between reality and satire has closed to the point that almost anything is believable. In this particular video that I'm going to show you, Andrew talks about some of the things that he predicted with his Tania character that later came to pass, and it's quite amusing or tragic, depending on your point of view.
This month is the 5th anniversary of the publication of Tania McGrath's acclaimed book, Woke, A Guide to Social Justice. I created this intersectional activist and slam poet in order to satirize the new intolerant and authoritarian identity-obsessed religion and its stranglehold on society. Having seen so many posh and entitled activists berating working-class straight white people for their privilege, I could think of no more appropriate reaction than mockery. Even Harry Windsor was at it, and he's an actual prince. 5 years on, and I cannot decide whether I find it funny or depressing that so many of Titania's ideas in that book ended up becoming reality. Nothing that Titania was ever able to suggest has not eventually been outdone by real-life activists. It's as though they were reading her book for inspiration. For instance, in a chapter from Woke, entitled Towards an Intersectional Socialist Utopia, Titania makes the following observation.
Capitalism, after all, is a singularly male phenomenon. The ultimate symbol of capitalism, the skyscraper, is nothing more than a giant cock on the horizon, fucking the heavens.
I guess I should have warned explicit language. I watched a couple of Andrew's stand-up routines, which are available online. And he does work blue. He can be very, very dirty as any comedian out there, which is not for everybody, but I do enjoy it. Skyscrapers are nothing but a giant cock on the horizon fucking the heavens. And yet, people thought Tatiana was a real person, and they gave her ideas credence.
16 months after the book was published, this article appeared in The Guardian. Upward thrusting buildings ejaculating into the sky. Do cities have to be so sexist? Or what about this passage from a chapter in Woke called White Death? Here, Titania calls out Helen Keller for her white privilege.
Consider, if you will, the example of white American author Helen Keller, 1880 to 1968. Even though she was left deaf and blind following an illness as a baby, she still managed to study for a degree, write 12 books, and travel the world to give lectures. This kind of privilege is staggering.
Who wants to change places with Helen Keller and be deaf and blind? I don't think that's much of a privilege. But some people believe it. They'll believe anything, I think.
With an article that appeared in Time magazine over a year later, in which the author writes, however, to some black disability rights activists, like Anita Cameron, Helen Keller is not radical at all. Just another, despite disabilities, privileged white person. And yet another example of history telling the story of privileged white Americans. And how about this tweet from October 2019, in which Titania had some advice for dog owners.
Dog owners, stop saying good boy and good girl to your pets. This kind of gendered language is normalizing the myth of canine sexual dimorphism and delegitimizes the lived experience of trans dogs.
That's a good one. Trans dogs. I'll have to go check with my dogs and see how they feel about that.
Delegitimizes the lived experience of trans dogs.
And the subsequent outrage ensured that the tweet went viral. And just a couple of months ago, a leading pet talent agency in the UK called Paws was asking owners whether their cats or dogs identified as gender neutral or non-binary.
I think it's more, do the owners identify as insane? Would be a better question.
After the backlash, the company claimed it was a mistake. But the specific addition of a gender identity category on an application, it's hardly the equivalent of a typo. And what about this article from the website of Vet Help Direct? Which pronoun do pets have a gender identity? And then, of course, we've got PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, the world's leading animal rights organization, which posted the following call to arms on Twitter to end speciesism. Evolve your language and learn how we've been taught to think of other animals. They're not an it and should never be talked about like objects. It's about time that somebody took a stand for non-binary pigeons. And this is by no means the only example of Titania's ideas being enacted by woke activists. Here's my top 10 examples of when her absurd demands became reality. On 22nd December 2018, Titania tweeted,
"We should remove biological sex from birth certificates altogether to prevent any more mistakes from being made."
And on 17th December 2020, the New England Journal of Medicine concurred. Sex designations on birth certificates offer no clinical utility, and they can be harmful for intersex and transgender people. And on the 1st of October 2019, Titania tweeted,
I will grant that may be true in a very, very small percentage of people who, due to a genetic defect, have been given ambiguous sexual organs. It does happen. Nature is not perfect, and nature does make mistakes. It's rare. In the overwhelming majority, 99.9% of people are born male or female. I know you can get cancer for saying that, but for New England Journal of Medicine, which is supposed to be the most prestigious medical journal in the world, to say that, it's absurd.
And on the 1st of October 2019, Titania tweeted this.
"White parents, if you really want to prove that you're not racist, you should send your teenage daughters on unaccompanied walking holidays in the tribal regions of North Pakistan."
On the 12th of October 2019, Forbes magazine wrote, "Why Pakistan should be on every solo female traveler's bucket list."
Now that's just dangerous. I wouldn't advise that for my daughters or any unaccompanied females. In fact, I wouldn't even recommend that for a woman accompanied by a man, because the man could certainly be attacked and overcome, and then the woman raped. That just happened recently in India to a Spanish couple that were traveling the world. Gotta be a little careful about where you travel. It's not all as civilized. In fact, there's a few parts of this country that I wouldn't advise that you travel solo.
On the 15th of October 2018, Titania suggested that Winston Churchill was worse than the Nazis. She wrote,
"During the Second World War, these two Nazis went head to head. Can we really be sure the better man won?"
And on the 11th of February 2021, Churchill College at Cambridge University agreed. Churchill College panel claims wartime PM was a white supremacist leading an empire worse than the Nazis.
The sad thing about that is that people today are so ignorant of history and so easily swayed by what some idiot said on TikTok or other social media that there probably are people that will accept that. Don't forget that one of the first things Obama did when he got into office was remove the bust of Winston Churchill from the White House. His particular beef had to do with Churchill's alleged colonial activity in Kenya, the birthplace of supposedly Obama's father. To say that Churchill was worse than Hitler, a man who organized the extermination of over 6 million Jews and other minorities, I'm not buying that one.
On 29th April 2019, Titania pointed out that scientists have yet to discover the difference between men and women. She wrote,
"If scientists are so clever, how come they haven't found a way to tell the difference between human males and females?"
And on the 24th of March 2022, USA Today published this: scientists agree there is no sufficient way to clearly define what makes someone a woman. And with billions of women on the planet, there is much variation.
There may be much variation in women, but in general, women have certain biological features that men do not have. They have ovaries, they have vaginas, they have mammary glands in their breasts, their pelvis is wider to allow for childbirth. Let's not get into their brains. Very different. But this absurdity was elevated to national debate when a lady was nominated for the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, and was asked during her confirmation hearing, Judge Jackson, if she could define what a woman is. And her response was, "I'm not a biologist." You have to be pretty highly educated to be quite that stupid.
On the 22nd of January 2019, Tania called for the Oscars to prioritize diversity. She wrote,
"I've decided to award new intersectional Oscars to ensure diversity triumphs over merit. Categories to include Most Feminist Picture, Most Woke Screenplay, Least Predatory Male, Gayest Sound Editing, Fattest Supporting Filipino, and Bravest Vegan in a Trans Black."
See, that's how you do satire. A little hint here. You start with something that sounds semi-reasonable, the most feminist picture. And then as you go along, you slowly reel them in. Most woke screenplay, well, maybe. Least predatory male, well, now we're starting to go off the rails. Gayest sound editing? That's funny. And then, of course, from there, it just goes to the absurd, the fattest supporting Filipino, and the bravest vegan in a trans black role. By the time you got to the end of that list, you probably realized you were reading satire. In some cases, people could figure it out, but in a lot of cases, people were unsure. Is she real? I remember the first time I encountered her, I was like, is this a real person? It seems like satire, but could it be real? Yeah, it could be real. There are people that crazy in this world.
On the 12th of June 2020, the Academy concurred. Oscars announce new diversity and inclusion plans.
Well, it's actually worse than that. They set up a whole set of rules as to how you would meet those diversities. You had to have a certain number of different types of minorities in your production crew or maybe even on screen. So this is how we end up with really absurd casting decisions, like the most recent one to put an ugly black female as Juliet in the Romeo and Juliet remake. I have nothing against an attractive black female. There are many of those. But this woman was ugly. I'm not buying her as an object of love. Sorry.
On the 30th of January 2019, Titania accused Laurence Olivier of a hate crime for his performance as Othello. On the 9th of October 2021, the University of Michigan agreed. Renowned professor cancelled for showing legend Laurence Olivier in blackface in 1965 film Othello.
This is a really common error to judge people in the past by the standards of today. It's done all the time, particularly the issue of slavery in colonial America, which was common not only in the South, but even in some states in the North. Can we condemn everybody who lived at that time who may have owned a slave as a racist? Not really. Some of those people later turned around and appealed the slavery laws and fought and died in the Civil War to end slavery. They weren't necessarily racist. They were just living in the world that they were born into and trying to make their way the best they knew. It's really dangerous when you start trying to apply modern concepts retroactively.
On the 6th of June 2019, Titania demanded an option on social media to mute white males. And on the 14th of July 2020, Instagram concurred. They came up with a mute white people sticker.
I believe a lot of people would like to mute white males. That's been ongoing for about 10 years now. If you have an opinion on any subject that people don't like, they don't just argue about whatever your opinion might be. They want to cancel you for being a straight white male. The straight white male's opinions don't matter. They're less than human.
This video is available as an article on my Substack. This and other articles will be available there first, So make sure to head on over there and subscribe now.
In addition to a funny comedian, as you might suspect, he's a very good writer. And I've been reading his Substack, and I highly recommend it. Look up Mr. Andrew Doyle, both for his writing and for his stand-up performances, which are hilarious. And I hope you enjoyed Change of Pace.